Have you ever felt like life is just too much to bear? Like the weight of your struggles is never ending, and no matter how hard you try, you just can't seem to find relief. I think we've all been there at some point. But what if I told you that your suffering has a purpose? That you're not just going through something, but you're actually going to something better. You see, every pain, every struggle, and every hardship is leading you to a place of growth, transformation, and ultimately, a better version of yourself. Let's dive into why your suffering is not in vain, and how it could be setting you up for something far greater than you could ever imagine. When you're going through a difficult time, it can feel isolating. It's natural to ask questions like, why is this happening to me? In Romans 8:28 we are reminded that in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. This doesn't mean that everything that happens to us is good, but rather, that God can use even our most painful experiences for good when we trust Him. He takes the broken pieces of our lives and molds them into something beautiful. Now, let's think about that for a moment. What if your suffering isn't something random or pointless? What if it's part of a divine plan? What if, instead of fighting it, we allowed ourselves to embrace the process, trusting that something greater is waiting on the other side? This is something I've learned firsthand. I can look back on moments in my life where I thought everything was falling apart, only to realize later that things were actually falling into place. I didn't ask for the hardship, and I certainly didn't enjoy it, but the growth that came from it, that was worth every tear. When I was younger, I always tried to avoid pain, to escape it. But as I've matured, I've come to understand that avoiding suffering doesn't make life easier. It makes it harder. The more we try to escape pain, the less equipped we are to handle it when it inevitably comes. What's more, pain has a way of teaching us things that we can't learn any other way. The role of pain in our growth. Think about physical fitness. Anyone who has ever tried to get in shape knows that it's impossible without some level of discomfort. Muscles ache, lungs burn, and yet, it's that very pain that signals growth. In the same way, emotional and spiritual growth often requires going through discomfort. We don't grow in our comfort zones. It's through challenges, through suffering, that we are refined and made stronger. In my own life, I've found that the moments of greatest growth came when I was at my weakest. It was in those moments that I had to surrender my own strength and rely on something greater. I've learned more about myself and about God through suffering than I ever have during easy times. Personal reflection. Suffering refines us. One of the hardest things to do when you're in the midst of suffering is to trust that it's for a reason. It's easy to become bitter, to feel like life is against you. But the truth is, suffering can either make you better or bitter. The choice is yours. You can choose to let it shape you in positive ways, or you can let it destroy you. I've seen both outcomes in people I know. Those who choose to embrace the lessons suffering brings tend to emerge from it with a renewed sense of purpose and strength. Those who choose to wallow in bitterness often find themselves stuck, unable to move forward. The bigger picture. This world is not our home. Something that has always brought me comfort in times of suffering is the reminder that this world is not our final destination. The Bible teaches us that our present sufferings are not even worth comparing to the glory that will be revealed in us. Romans 8:18. This means that no matter how hard things get here on earth, there's something far greater waiting for us. We live in a fallen world, and that means suffering is inevitable. But it's not forever, it's temporary. And while we're here, we're not just meant to suffer for suffering's sake. God is preparing us for something greater. He's molding us, shaping us, and refining us so that we are ready for the greater things that lie ahead both in this life and in the life to come. Personal insight. Shifting focus. One of the things I've learned over the years is that my focus during suffering makes all the difference. When I focus solely on my pain, it overwhelms me. It feels endless, and I become discouraged. But when I shift my focus to what I'm learning through the pain, and to the bigger picture of what God is doing, everything changes. It's not that the pain goes away, but my perspective shifts. I start to see my suffering as part of a process, not as a punishment. Learning to trust God in the midst of suffering. Perhaps one of the most difficult, yet rewarding, lessons we can learn through suffering is how to trust God. It's easy to trust Him when life is going well. But when things fall apart, when the suffering feels unbearable, that's when our faith is truly tested. And in those moments, we have a choice to trust that God is still in control, or to turn away and give in to despair. What I've found is that trusting God in the midst of suffering brings a kind of peace that is hard to explain. It doesn't make the pain disappear, but it makes it bearable. And more than that, it gives the pain meaning. When you know that God is working even in your darkest moments, it gives you the strength to keep going. Concluding lesson: suffering leads to glory. So, what's the takeaway? If there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this: your suffering is not in vain. It's not meaningless. It's preparing you for something greater. And while you may not understand why things are happening the way they are, you can trust that God has a plan. The suffering you're experiencing now is temporary, but the glory that is to come, that's eternal. So don't lose hope. Don't give up. Trust the process, and trust that something far greater is waiting for you on the other side. Final thought: turning pain into purpose. As we close, remember this: you're not just going through something. You're going to something, and that something is going to be worth every bit of the struggle. Pain and suffering, though difficult, have a way of turning us into the people we were meant to be. So let's embrace the process, trust in God's plan, and look forward to the glory that's waiting on the other side.